Question number 1 on the reading portion of College Board's Test 5. Over the course of the passage, the primary focus shifts from. So when we talk about primary focus, we have to think big picture. We have to zoom out of this piece and ask, okay, what was this story about? And furthermore, roughly when it says primary focus shifts from, what was said in the beginning, roughly, and then what was said at the end. That's how I like to think about it. Just very broadly speaking, I just say, where was the beginning of the story? And then where's the end of the story? And how did the primary focus shift from those 2 points? So don't get caught up with these questions of a small little detail that you remember. Because chances are one tiny little detail that they only bring up once is not going to be a primary focus of the passage. Over the course of the passage, the primary focus shifts from A, Limey's inner thoughts to observations made by the other character. Let's take a look at some of these, what happened, if we can summarize in our own words. So what happens in the beginning, this part that we just scribbled all over? I think that we talk about the Alcazar restaurant, and then we talk about how it's described, and then we talk about Limey for the first time, but we really talk about his history book. So in the beginning, we're talking about the restaurant, we're talking about the history book, this is all about the history book, and then we talk about how Limey is reading about the peace of Paris and the Vienna Conference and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like this is very much centered around the restaurant, the book, and in a way Limey, but not so much. And then what happens at the end? Now we're describing what I assume to be Limey's father. Mr. Peters, it says, the fact where his father's coat was hung next to his chair and things like that. So, and then we're talking about a physical character and how, in a way, time marches on. And some people still want to hold on to their past. Again, very big picture here. I'm not trying to get nitty-gritty and try to remember like one little thing that happened. Over the course of the passage, the primary focus shifts from Limey's inner thoughts to observations made by the other characters. Okay, we don't get in the beginning Limey's inner thoughts. We do get a little bit here where Limey's reading about something, but I don't know if that's his inner thought about what he believes or what he thinks. I actually consider that to be somewhere around here in the middle of the piece, where we get Limey's inner thoughts about how the laughter is too loud or too annoying. But I don't actually see anything talking about his inner thoughts about what he's believing or what he thinks or how he interacts with the scene. And then furthermore, to observations made by the other characters, there are no observations made by other characters. The only observations that are being made are by the narrator and by Limey. Limey is talking about what he believes in this middle part, and maybe you can argue that this part at the end is Limey, but maybe it's just an omniscient narrator who knows and can describe the scene like Limey realized it. I'm not a fan of this, the fact that we're getting kind of cornered into believing certain things that aren't really holding up to be true. Let's take a look at B. Over the course of the passage, the primary focus shifts from B, an exchange between strangers. Okay, this bothers me. What exchange? What exchange is happening? Maybe you can argue that the waitress is a stranger. There's no exchange. It's not like someone gives him a package or something. An exchange, maybe, no. I'm trying to rationalize it. Like, is it possible that the book is considered a stranger? An exchange between strangers to a satisfying personal relationship. Again, this seems a little bit too vague for me to understand what it means. That's, I guess, referring to the father. The fact that the father is like this, but they never talk about how it's satisfying. We don't know. It actually seems pretty tepid or cool. I didn't think you were coming. The fact that the father's late. We talk about this father as kind of being this kind of sad figure, and how he's like trying to relive his past or trying to be younger than he actually is. I don't really know what that means. What about C? The physical settings of the scene. Maybe. So I feel like we do talk about the physical setting of the scene. That we're talking about the physical setting of the restaurant, and maybe also the physical setting of the book later in the first paragraph. To different characters' personality traits. So I like this and I don't like it. So I like it because the physical settings of the scene is true. To the different characters' personality traits, broadly speaking, you might argue that we're talking about personality traits, but now I'm thinking different characters' plural personality traits. I'm not liking, anytime I like this, like there's a plural possessive here. So what are the character traits? Now let's think what a character trait is. The character trait is like you're honest, or you're trustworthy, or you're kind, or you're upset. I don't know, like you're depressed. These are like character traits, personality traits that you ascribe to certain characters. Now I have to ask myself very critically, do we talk about the different characters' personality traits plural? Do we know what the personality traits are of these four this party of four, the two men and two women, other than they're a little bit loud and boisterous, I don't know if that's necessarily a personality trait. We might talk about the personality trait of the father, Mr. Peters. However, is that different characters, plural personality traits? I'm not a fan of how that's... I feel like we're painting with a big brush here. And again, I just don't want to be cornered by the College Board into believing that this is the answer. I don't know. Let's leave it. I like C more than any of these other answer choices, that's for sure. Let's get rid of A and B. What about D? Over the course of the passage, the primary focus shifts from Limey's experience reading a book. Okay, I like how that seems pretty neutral, because it does, for a little bit, talk about how Limey is experiencing this book. It does talk in the beginning, too, about how he's experiencing the restaurant, but then how he's mostly, if we look, this whole part of the paragraph is talking about the book. So, yes, Limey's experience reading a book to descriptions of people in the restaurant. I like this answer better than C. I like on how it's a lot, in a way, safer for me to answer because it's right more times than C is. So what I mean by that is Limey's experience reading a book. Can you argue that we are describing his experience reading a book? It's like, no, he's reading a book. That's his experience. So to descriptions of people in the restaurant. So now I like that's a lot broader by saying we're describing people in a restaurant versus we're talking about the character's personality traits. Descriptions is very possible. We're talking about how, aren't we describing this lady on how she had the face of a young boy, on how the other woman had short hair, how the men were older, how they were laughing, how it annoyed Limey, etc. So I actually like on how we're just describing people versus talking about their personality traits. Talking about personality traits is one step too far that we can't say is correct based on the passage. You might argue that they're talking about the personality trait, certainly of Mr. Peters, however, that's only one character. And I like actually the safety of numbers here by talking about descriptions of people. Are we describing Mr. Peters here? Yes, we're describing Mr. Peters. Are we describing these ladies and the men? Yes, we're describing ladies and the men. And finally, just to go back to the beginning of this question, Limey's experience reading a book. Do we talk about him experiencing this book? Yes. We experience the book almost all throughout the first half of the piece. So while C is a really good, tempting answer, I feel like it backs us into a corner by forcing us to accept things that aren't exactly 100% always true. I like on how C talked about the physical setting of the scene, but what's more important, the setting of the scene or the setting, arguably, of the restaurant? And I like on how, of the book, excuse me, and I like on how D nicely defines that. And furthermore, I'm not comfortable picking that we're talking about different characters' personality traits when I can just say we're just describing people. The answer to number one, tough question, is going to be D.